My name is Ibrahim Traoré. Before I speak about the night that changed my life forever, I want to tell you something honest about myself. Many people know me as a leader. Many know me because of politics, public service, or the responsibilities that come with leading a nation. But long before any title was attached to my name, I was simply a man searching for success, security, and purpose. I have always believed in God. I grew up hearing about Jesus Christ. I knew the scriptures. I understood many religious teachings. Yet there was a period in my life when my heart slowly became attached to things that seemed important in the eyes of the world. Wealth impressed me. Influence impressed me. Achievement impressed me. I measured success through possessions, investments, property, and status. Outwardly, I appeared successful. Inwardly, I was becoming blind to something far more important. Today, I am sharing this story not because I want praise. I am not telling it so people will admire me or speak well of me. In fact, if there is any lesson in this testimony, it is that I was the one who needed mercy. I am sharing it because there are countless leaders, business owners, professionals, and successful men and women walking the same road that I once walked. Many of them are good people. Many work hard. Many sincerely believe they have earned everything through discipline and determination. That is exactly what I believed. I thought success belonged to those who deserved it. I thought poverty was usually the result of poor choices. I thought that if someone truly wanted a better life, they would simply work harder and change their circumstances. Because of that mindset, I rarely stopped long enough to listen to the suffering of people who lived in hardship. I could see poverty with my eyes, but I did not truly see the people living inside it. Then something happened that shattered everything I believed. One night, without warning, my understanding of wealth, leadership, judgment, and mercy was completely overturned. What I witnessed was unlike any dream I had ever experienced. It was so vivid that even today, years later, I can still remember every detail. That night, Jesus Christ showed me something that terrified me. He showed me what waits for people who possess power but refuse compassion. He showed me what happens when wealth becomes more important than mercy. And before that experience ended, he gave me a command that would force me to make the most difficult decision of my entire life. The decision would cost me more than money. It would cost me the identity I had spent years building. What happened next changed the course of my life forever. There was a time in my life when I believed I had everything a man could want. I was living in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, in a part of the city known for its large homes, private compounds, and comfortable lifestyle. My residence stood among some of the most impressive properties in the northern area of the city. The house itself covered more than 2,000 square meters. Its walls were high. Security guards watched the entrances day and night. Vehicles waited in the courtyard. Staff members handled daily responsibilities. Everything around me reflected success. If someone had looked at my life from the outside, they would have concluded that I was blessed beyond measure. At the time, I would have agreed with them. Every morning I woke up surrounded by comfort. Every evening I returned to the same comfort. I rarely worried about food, transportation, healthcare, or any of the challenges that burden millions of ordinary people. The problems that consumed the lives of struggling families felt distant from my reality. Yet the truth was that those struggles were not distant at all. Only a few kilometers from where I lived, entire communities faced hardships that I barely noticed. Families lived without reliable electricity. Mothers walked long distances to collect water. Children studied under difficult conditions. Many households worried constantly about where their next meal would come from. Some people worked from sunrise until sunset and still could not provide enough for their families. These realities existed around me every day. I saw them, but I did not truly allow myself to feel them. When I drove through poorer neighborhoods, I often looked at them through the lens of my own success. I told myself that I had worked hard to reach where I was. I convinced myself that determination alone explained why some people succeeded while others struggled. The more successful I became, the more convinced I was that success belonged entirely to the individual. I rarely considered the obstacles that others faced. I rarely asked about the circumstances that trapped families in poverty. I rarely wondered how many people had been born into situations so difficult that escape seemed impossible. Instead, I developed a quiet habit of judging people without knowing their stories. That habit slowly hardened my heart. I remember passing through areas where children played beside unfinished roads and damaged buildings. I remember seeing elderly men sitting outside small homes built from materials that had weathered years of heat and rain. I remember women carrying heavy containers of water while caring for several children at the same time. Yet I rarely stopped. I rarely listened. I rarely asked their names. I simply continued with my day. At that stage of my life, I measured people according to standards that now seem painfully shallow. I respected those who had influence. I admired those who had wealth. I listened carefully to those who held power, but I paid little attention to those who possessed none of those things. Without realizing it, I had begun to believe a dangerous lie. I believed that my achievements belonged entirely to me. I believed that everything I owned was the result of my intelligence, my discipline, and my effort. I thanked God for my success, but deep inside, I was also congratulating myself. That pride did not arrive suddenly. It grew slowly. It grew through years of accomplishment. It grew through praise from others. It grew through recognition, comfort, and status. Most dangerous of all, it grew without me noticing. Around that time, I occasionally read reports about poverty across Africa. International organizations published studies showing that millions of people throughout the continent continued to live below poverty levels. Reports discussed food insecurity, limited access to health care, unemployment, and lack of educational opportunities. I heard these statistics. I read those reports. But numbers are easy to ignore when they remain numbers. A report cannot cry. A statistic cannot tell you its story. A percentage cannot look into your eyes and ask for help. Because I viewed poverty from a distance, I never allowed those realities to reach my heart. What I failed to understand was that leadership is not measured by the comfort of the leader. Leadership is measured by the condition of the people. At that time, however, I was not thinking about that truth. I was thinking about investments. I was thinking about property. I was thinking about growth. I was thinking about protecting and expanding everything I had accumulated. The larger my assets became, the more secure I felt. Or at least I thought I felt secure. Looking back now, I understand that my security rested on fragile foundations. Money can disappear. Property can disappear. Influence can disappear. Titles can disappear. Health can disappear. Life itself can disappear in a single moment. But I had not yet learned those lessons. I was comfortable. I was successful. I was respected. And I believed I was in control. What I did not know was that God was preparing to confront every assumption I had built my life upon. What I did not know was that a single night would expose the poverty hidden inside a wealthy heart. What I did not know was that heaven was about to show me a reality far greater than anything I had ever considered. The lesson was coming, and it would arrive when I least expected it. The night that changed everything began like any other night. There was nothing unusual about the evening. I had spent the day dealing with responsibilities, meetings, decisions, and countless matters that demanded my attention. By the time darkness settled over Ouagadougou, I felt exhausted. The city had grown quiet. Most of the lights outside my residence had dimmed. The sounds of traffic had faded into the distance. I remember finishing the last tasks of the day and preparing for rest. Nothing seemed different. Nothing warned me that my life was about to change forever. Sometime around 2 o'clock in the morning while I was asleep, I experienced something unlike anything that had ever happened to me before. Even now, years later, I struggle to describe it fully. It did not feel like an ordinary dream. It did not feel like imagination. It did not feel like a collection of random images created by a sleeping mind. Everything felt real. More real than many moments I had experienced while awake. At first, I became aware of an overwhelming stillness. The kind of stillness that cannot be found anywhere on earth. It was as though every sound had vanished. Every distraction had disappeared. Every thought had become silent. Then I felt something that startled me. I felt as though I was no longer confined to my physical body. I could see myself lying where I had fallen asleep. I could see the room. I could see familiar surroundings. Yet at the same time, I was somehow outside of them. Fear immediately gripped me. I did not understand what was happening. Questions rushed through my mind. Was I dying? Had something happened to me? Was this real? Before I could make sense of anything, a brilliant light appeared. The light was unlike sunlight. It was unlike fire. It was unlike electricity. No earthly source could compare to what I was seeing. The brightness was overwhelming, yet it did not hurt my eyes. The power of it filled everything around me. It seemed alive. It seemed holy. It seemed to carry an authority beyond human understanding. As the light grew stronger, I felt a deep awareness of my own weakness. Suddenly, all the confidence I had carried for years disappeared. My accomplishments meant nothing. My possessions meant nothing. My titles meant nothing. My reputation meant nothing. Standing before that light, I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. Then I heard a voice. The moment that voice spoke, I knew I was hearing something beyond human speech. The voice carried authority, truth, and power all at once. It was not loud in the way humans are loud, yet it was impossible to ignore. Every word seemed to penetrate directly into my soul. There was no confusion, no uncertainty, no possibility of misunderstanding. The voice knew everything about me, every thought, every action, every hidden motive, every secret pride, every excuse I had ever made. I cannot adequately explain the feeling. It was both terrifying and comforting at the same time. Terrifying because nothing about me was hidden. Comforting because the presence behind the voice was perfectly just. Then the words came, words I have never forgotten. My son, look carefully at what awaits those who refuse to love the poor. The sentence struck me with incredible force. At first, I did not understand why those words had been spoken to me. I had never considered myself a cruel person. I had never deliberately harmed the poor. I had never viewed myself as evil. Yet the voice did not accuse me of violence. The voice did not accuse me of theft. The voice did not accuse me of hatred. Instead, it focused on something I had barely considered. Love, or rather the absence of it. For the first time, I began to understand that failing to love can be its own form of wrongdoing. Ignoring suffering can become a sin. Looking away can become a sin. Possessing the ability to help while choosing comfort instead can become a sin. These thoughts flashed through my mind within moments. Before I could process them fully, the environment around me began to change. The brilliant light remained behind me, but ahead, something else emerged. The atmosphere shifted. The peace I had felt suddenly disappeared. The air itself seemed heavier. An indescribable sense of dread filled the space around me. I felt my heart racing. Every instinct inside me wanted to turn away, yet I could not. Something was drawing my attention forward. The darkness ahead seemed deeper than ordinary darkness. It was not simply the absence of light. It felt like the absence of hope, the absence of peace, the absence of joy, the absence of everything good. I remember feeling a fear unlike any fear I had known before. Not fear of physical pain, not fear of losing money, not fear of losing power. A deeper fear, the fear of seeing eternal consequences, the fear of seeing truth revealed without disguise, the fear of discovering where a human life ultimately leads when mercy is rejected. Then the voice spoke again. This time, there was both sadness and authority in the words. Watch carefully. Those two words echoed through me. I knew I was about to witness something that would remain with me for the rest of my life. I knew I was being shown something for a reason, not to satisfy curiosity, not to entertain, not to frighten without purpose, but to transform me. At that moment, the darkness before me began to open. What appeared next would shatter every illusion I had about wealth, power, and success. What appeared next would force me to confront the condition of my own heart. And what appeared next would become the beginning of the most painful and necessary change of my life. The terrible vision was about to begin. What appeared before me is something I have never fully forgotten. Even now, when I close my eyes and think about that night, fragments of the vision return with disturbing clarity. The darkness that had opened before me seemed endless. It stretched farther than I could see. There was no horizon, no comforting light, no sign of relief, only a vast and terrible emptiness that carried a weight unlike anything I had ever experienced. At first, I heard sounds. Not one sound, thousands, perhaps millions. Cries, groans, pleading voices, desperate calls for help. The voices overlapped one another until they formed a constant wave of anguish. I had never heard suffering expressed on such a scale. The pain was not merely physical. It was deeper. It sounded like regret. It sounded like hopelessness. It sounded like people realizing something important when it was already too late. The farther I looked into that place, the more people I saw. Some appeared familiar. Not because I recognized specific faces, but because I recognized the kinds of people they had once been. Many had clearly possessed influence during their earthly lives. Some appeared to have been leaders. Others looked like wealthy business owners. Others seemed to have held positions of authority and prestige. These were not people who had spent their lives forgotten by society. Many had once been admired. Many had once been respected. Many had once been feared, yet none of those things mattered now. Whatever status they had enjoyed on earth had disappeared completely. No one there appeared important. No one there appeared powerful. No one there appeared superior to anyone else. Every earthly title had been stripped away. Every symbol of success had vanished. Only truth remained. As I watched, a terrible realization settled over me. Many of these people had not arrived there because they lacked intelligence. Many had not arrived there because they lacked opportunity. Many had not arrived there because they were weak. They had arrived there because their hearts had become hardened. Some had spent years exploiting those beneath them. Some had enriched themselves while ignoring the suffering around them. Some had possessed the ability to help but repeatedly chose indifference. Some had become so consumed by wealth and status that they stopped seeing other human beings as people worthy of dignity. I watched them cry out, but no one answered. Again and again I heard voices calling for mercy. Again and again I heard pleas for relief. Again and again I heard requests for a second chance. Yet no response came. What disturbed me most was not the volume of the suffering. It was the permanence of it. Every person seemed to understand that they could not change their situation. The opportunities they once had were gone. The choices they could have made were finished. The time for action had ended. Only consequences remained. Then my attention was drawn toward a group of individuals standing near what appeared to be a barren and desolate area. They looked exhausted. Their faces reflected overwhelming despair. One by one, they reached toward what looked like water in the distance. From where I stood, it appeared close enough to touch. Yet every time they tried to reach it, it remained beyond their grasp. The torment on their faces was difficult to describe. The thirst they experienced seemed unbearable. It was as if every part of them cried out for relief. Yet relief never came. Some fell to their knees. Some stretched out their hands. Some begged aloud. But nothing changed. Nearby, I noticed others staring toward what appeared to be food. Again, it seemed close. Again, it seemed attainable. Yet they could never reach it. The sight reminded me of people chasing something they desperately needed but could never obtain. The frustration never ended. The longing never ended. The disappointment never ended. Everything repeated without relief. As horrifying as these scenes were, something even more painful became visible. The people there were not only suffering from thirst or hunger, they were suffering from memory. Each person seemed forced to remember moments from their earthly lives. Moments they had ignored. Moments they had dismissed. Moments they had chosen selfishness over compassion. I watched expressions change on their faces as memories surfaced. A wealthy man remembered turning away someone who needed help. A leader remembered ignoring the cries of his people. A business owner remembered choosing profit while workers suffered. A powerful official remembered opportunities to show mercy that he never took. Every memory became a source of pain, not because the events themselves were extraordinary, but because those simple moments had carried eternal significance. Many of them had not committed crimes that would make newspaper headlines. Many had simply spent their lives loving themselves more than others. They had built comfortable lives while remaining blind to suffering. They had heard cries for help and chosen convenience instead. As I continued watching, an uncomfortable feeling began growing inside me. At first, I resisted it. I wanted to believe I was only an observer. I wanted to believe this vision concerned other people. I wanted to keep a safe distance between myself and what I was seeing. But the longer I watched, the harder that became, because I began recognizing parts of myself. Not identical actions, not identical circumstances, but identical attitudes. I recognized pride. I recognized indifference. I recognized self-importance. I recognized the tendency to judge others without understanding their struggles. I recognized the habit of valuing achievement more than compassion. The similarities terrified me. For the first time, I stopped looking at the people in the vision as strangers. Instead, I began asking a question that shook me deeply. If my life continued unchanged, how different would I truly be from them? The question echoed through my mind. How different would I be? I thought about the poor families living only a short distance from my residence. I thought about the people I had overlooked. I thought about the times I had assumed poverty was simply the result of laziness. I thought about the opportunities I had possessed to make a difference. Suddenly, the vision no longer felt distant. It felt personal. Very personal. Fear gripped me more strongly than before. Not because I believed I was looking at strangers, but because I realized I was looking at a warning directed at me. The cries around me continued. The darkness remained. The hopelessness remained. Then my attention was drawn toward a single figure. Among all the people I had seen, this man stood out. Something about him seemed important. Something about his story was about to reveal a truth that would strike directly at my heart. I could not look away. And as I watched him, I sensed that the most important part of the vision was only beginning. My attention remained fixed on the man standing before me. Among the countless people I had seen in that terrible place, there was something different about him. I cannot explain exactly how I knew it. I simply understood that I was being shown his story for a reason. The darkness around him seemed no less severe than the darkness surrounding everyone else. Yet as I looked at him, scenes from his earthly life began unfolding before my eyes. It was as though I was watching memories. I saw a large residence surrounded by walls. I saw luxury. I saw comfort. I saw a man who had accumulated enormous wealth during his lifetime. He owned businesses. He controlled valuable properties. He had influence in financial circles. People respected him because of what he possessed. Many admired him. Others envied him. To the outside world, he appeared successful. In many ways, he resembled the kind of person I once hoped to become. As the scenes continued, I watched him move through his daily life. Meetings filled his schedule. Investments occupied his attention. Opportunities for profit excited him. Expansion interested him. Growth motivated him. There was nothing inherently wrong with those things. Work itself was not the problem. Success itself was not the problem. Wealth itself was not the problem. The problem was what had happened inside his heart. The vision slowly revealed it. Every day, people appeared near the entrance of his property. Some needed food. Some needed medicine. Some needed assistance. Some simply hoped someone would listen. Yet the wealthy man rarely paid attention. He had explanations for everything. He told himself that people should solve their own problems. He told himself that helping would only encourage dependency. He told himself that his responsibility ended with his own success. Again and again, opportunities for compassion appeared before him. Again and again, he chose indifference. The most painful part of the vision was how ordinary those moments seemed. There was no dramatic act of cruelty, no public scandal, no shocking crime, just countless small decisions, countless moments when he could have cared but did not, countless opportunities to show mercy that he ignored. The years passed, his wealth increased, his reputation grew, his assets multiplied, the world celebrated him. People described him as successful. People pointed to him as an example. People praised his achievements. Yet no one could see the condition of his heart. Then the vision shifted. I saw the end of his earthly life. It happened suddenly, much faster than he expected. One moment he was planning future projects. The next moment everything was over. The transition was immediate. The wealth remained behind. The businesses remained behind. The properties remained behind. The investments remained behind. Everything he had spent decades building stayed on earth. He carried none of it with him. Not a single possession crossed the boundary between life and eternity. Watching this unfold shook me deeply, because I realized the same truth applies to every one of us. No matter how much we accumulate, we leave it all behind. No matter how large our accounts become, we leave them behind. No matter how impressive our accomplishments appear, we leave them behind. The only things that continue are the things connected to the condition of the soul. Then I saw the man in the place of suffering. The contrast was devastating. The individual who once commanded respect now appeared broken. The man who once possessed abundance now possessed nothing. The man who once ignored the cries of others now cried out himself. And no one answered. I watched him fall to his knees. His face reflected desperation unlike anything I had ever witnessed. The pride that had defined his earthly life was gone. The confidence was gone. The arrogance was gone. Only regret remained. Again and again, he looked toward what appeared to be relief. Again and again, relief remained beyond reach. Then I heard him speak. His voice trembled. His words were simple. He was not asking for riches. He was not asking for power. He was not asking for influence. He was asking for a single drop of water. Just one drop. Nothing more. The request struck me with enormous force. A man who had once possessed millions now desired a single drop of water. A man who had once controlled vast resources now begged for something so small that most people would never think twice about it. Yet even that request went unanswered. The despair on his face became unbearable to watch. At that moment, a Passover, severed scripture suddenly entered my mind. Although I had heard it before, I had never truly understood it. Now I was seeing something that seemed connected to it in a profound way. I remembered the account recorded in the Gospel according to Luke, the story of the rich man and Lazarus. For years I had viewed it as a lesson, an important lesson, certainly, but still just a story. Now it felt different. Now it felt alive. The similarities were impossible to ignore. The wealthy man before me had spent his life surrounded by comfort while others suffered nearby. He had opportunities to help. He had opportunities to care. He had opportunities to show mercy. Yet he continually chose himself. And now he desired a single drop of relief that never came. As these thoughts filled my mind, the vision became even more personal. I began comparing his life with my own, not because our circumstances were identical, but because I recognized familiar patterns. I recognized how easy it is for comfort to create blindness. I recognized how easy it is for success to create pride. I recognized how easy it is for wealth to convince a person that they are self-sufficient. Most frightening of all, I recognized how easy it is to ignore suffering when suffering is not happening to you. The realization hit me like a blow. For years I had believed that my greatest dangers were political failures, economic setbacks, or external threats. Now I understood that the greatest danger might be something entirely different. A hardened heart, a heart that slowly loses compassion, a heart that becomes comfortable while others struggle, a heart that stops seeing people the way God sees them. As I continued watching the wealthy man, I felt a growing sense of sorrow, not only for him, for myself, because I understood that every warning I was witnessing had been given for a purpose. God was not showing me this vision to satisfy curiosity. He was confronting me. He was exposing things inside me that I had ignored for years. The experience left me shaken. By the time the vision began fading, I no longer felt like the same person who had entered it. The confidence I once had in my own goodness was disappearing. The excuses I had relied upon were disappearing. Questions were beginning to rise inside me. Questions I could no longer avoid. What would people say about my life if it ended today? What would the poor say? What would the forgotten say? What would God say? Those questions followed me long after the vision ended. And only a few days later, an unexpected visitor would arrive with a message that would confirm everything I had seen. The confirmation would come through a humble priest named Emmanuel. What he shared with me would leave me speechless. For several days after that experience, I could not think about anything else. The images remained vivid. The cries I had heard still echoed in my mind. The face of the wealthy man who begged for a single drop of water returned to me again and again. I tried to focus on my responsibilities. I attended meetings. I reviewed reports. I carried out my daily duties. But something inside me had changed. The questions would not leave me alone. What had I really seen? Why had I been shown those things? Was it simply a dream? Or was it a warning? The more I reflected on the experience, the more unsettled I became. For the first time in many years, I found myself examining my own heart rather than evaluating everyone else's. I began noticing attitudes and assumptions that I had previously ignored. I began questioning priorities that I had once considered normal. Most importantly, I began sensing that God was trying to teach me something I had resisted learning for a long time. Then something happened that shook me even further. Only a few days after the vision, I received a visit from a man I respected greatly. His name was Emmanuel. Father Emmanuel was a priest who served in a small chapel in Ouagadougou. He was not wealthy. He was not politically powerful. He was not famous. But he possessed something far more valuable. He possessed wisdom. Over the years, many people had sought his counsel because of his humility and understanding of Scripture. When he arrived that day, I had no intention of discussing the vision. In fact, I had spoken to almost no one about it. Part of me feared that others would not understand. Another part feared that speaking about it would somehow make it feel less real. So I welcomed him as I normally would. We sat together. We exchanged greetings. We spoke briefly about ordinary matters. Then, without any warning, Father Emmanuel changed the direction of the conversation. His expression became serious. He looked directly at me, and he said something that immediately captured my attention. "My son, there is a passage in Scripture that has been on my heart for several days." The moment he said those words, I felt a strange sensation. I cannot fully explain it. It was as though something inside me became alert. I listened carefully. Father Emmanuel opened his Bible. Then he began speaking about a story found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16. The story was familiar. I had heard it before. Many Christians have heard it. Yet that day, it felt entirely different. He began describing a wealthy man who lived in luxury every day. A man surrounded by comfort. A man who lacked nothing. Outside the rich man's gate lay a poor man named Lazarus. Lazarus suffered greatly. He was hungry. He was weak. He longed for scraps from the rich man's table. Day after day, the rich man passed him. Day after day, Lazarus remained at the gate. Day after day, an opportunity for compassion existed. And day after day, the wealthy man ignored it. As Father Emmanuel continued speaking, I felt my heart pounding harder. The similarities to the vision were becoming impossible to ignore. Then he described what happened after both men died. Lazarus was comforted. The rich man found himself in a place of torment. As I listened, every detail seemed to mirror what I had witnessed. Father Emmanuel spoke of suffering. He spoke of regret. Then he reached the part that caused a chill to run through my entire body. The rich man cried out for mercy, not wealth, not influence, not another chance to build a fortune. He asked for a drop of water, a single drop, one drop to cool his tongue, one drop to ease his suffering. The moment those words left Father Emmanuel's mouth, I froze. My entire body became still. I felt as though the room itself had gone silent, because that was exactly what I had seen. Not something similar, not something close. The same image, the same desperate request, the same unbearable thirst. I had told no one. I had not shared those details. Yet here sat a priest describing the exact scene that had appeared before me. Father Emmanuel continued. He explained that the rich man then asked for another favor. He wanted someone sent back to warn his family. He wanted his brothers to hear the truth before it was too late. He wanted them to change. He wanted them to avoid the fate he had experienced. But the answer he received was devastating. The time for warnings had already passed. The time for choosing had already passed. The opportunity to change had existed during earthly life. Now it was too late. As Father Emmanuel spoke those words, I felt overwhelmed, not by fear alone, by conviction. A deep conviction that God had been speaking directly to me. The vision was no longer an isolated experience. The scriptures confirmed it. The message was consistent. The warning was consistent. The lesson was consistent. God was not interested in my wealth. God was not impressed by my status. God was not measuring me according to the standards that society used. He was looking at my heart. He was looking at how I treated people. He was looking at whether I loved those whom the world often ignores. When Father Emmanuel finished speaking, there was a long silence between us. Neither of us spoke for several moments. I simply sat there processing everything I had heard. Finally, I asked him a question. Father, why do you think God keeps bringing this story before me? He looked at me calmly. Then he answered with words I will never forget. Because sometimes God warns people before he transforms them. Those words stayed with me long after he left. In fact, they became the beginning of a battle that would consume my thoughts for weeks. A battle between the person I had been and the person God was calling me to become. A battle between comfort and obedience. A battle between possession and compassion. A battle that would eventually force me to make the most difficult decision of my entire life. After Father Emmanuel left that day, I entered one of the most difficult seasons of my life. Many people assume that transformation happens instantly. They imagine that after receiving a vision or hearing a message from God, a person immediately changes and never struggles again. That was not my experience. The truth is that a fierce battle began inside me. It lasted for weeks. Some days it felt as though two different men were living within the same heart. One part of me wanted to obey what I believed God was showing me. The other part wanted to protect everything I had spent years building. I could not escape the questions. They followed me everywhere. They followed me into meetings. They followed me into moments of silence. They followed me late at night when everyone else was asleep. Again and again, the same thought returned. What if my life ended today? The question sounded simple, but I found it impossible to answer comfortably. For years, I had assumed I was doing well. I had assumed that because I was successful, respected, and productive, everything was fine. Now I was no longer certain. I began looking at my life from a different perspective, not through the eyes of society, not through the eyes of politicians, not through the eyes of investors, through the eyes of eternity. That perspective changed everything. One evening, I sat alone reviewing documents related to my finances. I looked at investment accounts. I looked at retirement funds. I looked at property records. I looked at assets accumulated over many years. The numbers were significant. The properties were valuable. The investments represented financial security that most people could only dream about. Yet as I studied those documents, something unexpected happened. For the first time, they felt strangely empty. I am not saying wealth suddenly became worthless. I am not saying resources have no value. Resources can do tremendous good. Money can help people. Property can help people. Businesses can help people. The problem was that most of my resources were serving me. Very little was being used to transform the lives of those who desperately needed help. That realization troubled me deeply. I remembered villages where families struggled to access clean water. I remembered children who lacked educational materials. I remembered mothers trying to feed families with almost nothing. I remembered elderly people living without adequate support. The more I remembered, the harder it became to justify my lifestyle. Yet another voice continued speaking inside me. It was the voice of fear. Fear can sound very reasonable. Fear rarely introduces itself honestly. Instead, it disguises itself as wisdom. It disguises itself as caution. It disguises itself as responsibility. That voice began presenting arguments. What about your future? What about your security? What about unexpected problems? What about old age? What if you need these resources later? What if giving too much leaves you vulnerable? The arguments sounded logical. Part of me wanted to accept them. Part of me wanted to continue living exactly as I always had. After all, I had not stolen my wealth. I had worked hard. I had made sacrifices. I had earned what I possessed. Why should I give it away? That question haunted me. For days I wrestled with it. Then another question emerged. A far more uncomfortable question. Why had God entrusted those resources to me in the first place? The question struck me with enormous force. I had spent years viewing myself as the owner of everything. What if I was merely a steward? What if the resources were never truly mine? What if God had placed them in my hands for a purpose greater than personal comfort? That thought changed the entire conversation. Suddenly, the issue was not ownership. The issue was responsibility. And responsibility is much harder to ignore. As the weeks passed, I found myself praying more than I had in years. Not polished prayers. Not public prayers. Honest prayers. Sometimes I simply sat in silence. Sometimes I asked God for clarity. Sometimes I asked Him to remove the burden I was feeling. But the burden remained. The conviction remained. The memory of the vision remained. The story of the rich man and Lazarus remained. Again and again I sensed the same message. Love the poor. Help the poor. Use what you have been given. Do not ignore what God has placed before you. One night, unable to sleep, I walked through my residence. The house was quiet. The halls were spacious. The rooms were beautifully furnished. Everything reflected comfort. Everything reflected success. As I walked through those rooms, I imagined how many families could live within that space. I imagined children studying in safety. I imagined parents sleeping without fear of rain entering through damaged roofs. I imagined lives being changed. For the first time, the house no longer felt like a symbol of achievement. It felt like a question God was placing before me. What are you going to do with what I have given you? I did not answer immediately. The struggle continued. Days became weeks. The battle intensified. Some mornings I woke up determined to act. By evening, fear would return. Other days I convinced myself that I could postpone the decision. Surely there would be a better time. Surely there would be another opportunity. Surely I could wait. But deep inside I knew the truth. Delay was simply another form of resistance. Eventually the conflict reached a point where I could no longer remain undecided. I understood that doing nothing was itself a decision. Keeping everything was a decision. Ignoring the conviction was a decision. Continuing unchanged was a decision. And I knew which direction my heart was being pulled. The realization terrified me, because I finally understood what obedience might require. Not a small donation, not a symbolic gesture, not a public act designed to impress people. Something much greater, something costly, something that would alter the course of my life. I knew that if I followed through, many people would not understand. Some would call me foolish. Some would call me irresponsible. Some would say I had lost my mind. Others would accuse me of wasting opportunities that most people spend their lives pursuing. They might have been sincere. They might even have believed they were protecting me. But I had reached a point where another question mattered more than all the others. What would happen if I ignored what God was asking of me? That question settled the battle. Not immediately, not emotionally, but decisively. For the first time, I stopped asking what the decision would cost me. Instead, I began asking what obedience required. And once I asked that question honestly, the answer became impossible to avoid. The decision that followed would shock my friends. It would shock business associates. It would shock people who believe success should always be accumulated rather than shared. Most surprising of all, it would shock me, because I was about to surrender the very things I once believed gave my life value. There comes a moment in every person's life when belief must become action. For weeks I had wrestled with conviction. For weeks I had prayed, questioned, doubted, and struggled. Eventually I realized that I could no longer remain between two positions. Either I would obey what I believed God was asking of me, or I would return to the comfortable life I had always known. There was no middle ground. The decision had to be made. I remember the morning clearly. I woke up with an unusual sense of calm. The battle that had consumed my thoughts for so long seemed strangely quiet. Not because all my fears had disappeared. The fears were still there. I still worried about the future. I still wondered whether I was making a mistake. I still knew that many people would disagree with what I was about to do. But something stronger than fear had finally taken root. Obedience. For the first time, I felt certain about the direction I needed to take. That day, I began putting plans into motion. The first step involved the largest and most valuable property I owned. The residence that had symbolized success for so many years. The residence that people admired. The residence that represented status, comfort, and achievement. I decided to sell it. Even writing those words today reminds me how difficult that decision felt at the time. For years, I had viewed that property as proof that I had succeeded. Now I was preparing to let it go. Not because the building itself was evil. Not because owning property is wrong. But because God had shown me that the value trapped within those walls could transform lives. And transformed lives mattered more than preserving a symbol. Once the decision became public, reactions arrived quickly. Some friends believed I was acting emotionally. Others assumed I would eventually change my mind. A few tried to convince me that I was making a terrible mistake. They reminded me how difficult it had been to acquire everything. They reminded me how uncertain the future could be. They reminded me that wealth provides security. Their concerns were understandable. In many cases, they spoke out of genuine care. But they could not see what I had seen. They had not experienced the vision. They had not carried the same conviction. They had not spent sleepless nights wrestling with questions of eternity. As the process continued, I expanded my plans. I sold additional luxury assets. Items that once seemed important suddenly appeared far less significant. The more I reflected on the needs around me, the harder it became to justify holding on to things that existed primarily for comfort and appearance. Then I turned my attention toward financial accounts, investment portfolios, savings, retirement resources, assets that had been carefully accumulated over many years. Reviewing those accounts brought another wave of fear. Numbers on paper have a way of making people feel secure. Even when money is not being used, people often feel comfort simply knowing it exists. I was no different. Part of me still wanted a safety net. Part of me still wanted guarantees. But another truth had become impossible to ignore. The people living in poverty did not have safety nets. Many did not have guarantees. Many faced uncertainty every day. If I truly believed God was calling me to help, then help could not remain theoretical. It had to become practical. It had to become visible. It had to become real. And so I made a decision that surprised even those closest to me. I committed the vast majority of my personal resources toward initiatives designed to serve struggling communities. Once that process began, remarkable things started happening. Housing support reached families who had spent years living in unsafe conditions. Homes that had once seemed impossible became realities. Parents who had worried constantly about shelter gained stability. Children gained environments where they could learn, grow, and dream. Water projects followed. In several communities, access to clean water improved dramatically. For many people, the change may have appeared simple. But anyone who has lived without reliable water understands how life-changing such improvements can be. Entire routines changed. Health conditions improved. Families spent less time searching for water and more time building better futures. Educational support became another priority. Books reached students. School supplies reached classrooms. Young people received opportunities that many had previously lacked. Every time I visited one of these projects, I was reminded that potential exists everywhere. Talent exists everywhere. Intelligence exists everywhere. Opportunity does not. When opportunity finally arrives, remarkable things become possible. Vocational training initiatives also began taking shape. Young adults learned practical skills. Communities gained new sources of economic activity. People who had once felt trapped began seeing pathways forward. Not every challenge disappeared. Not every problem was solved. But hope increased. And hope matters, perhaps more than many people realize. As these efforts expanded, public reactions continued. Some people praised the decisions. Others criticized them. A few openly questioned my judgment. Several individuals told me I was destroying my financial future. One person even asked whether I had lost touch with reality. I understood their concerns. From a purely financial perspective, many of my choices seemed irrational. The world teaches us to accumulate, The world teaches us to preserve. The world teaches us to maximize personal gain. Very few people are encouraged to surrender what they have spent years building. Yet something extraordinary happened during that period. Instead of feeling anxiety, I felt peace. Real peace. Not temporary excitement, not emotional enthusiasm. Peace. For years I had associated peace with security. I believed peace came from knowing I possessed enough resources. I believed peace came from protecting what I owned. I believed peace came from reducing risk. But I discovered something entirely different. True peace comes from alignment. Alignment between belief and action. Alignment between conviction and obedience. Alignment between what we claim to value and how we actually live. For the first time in my life, those things were beginning to align. The sensation was difficult to describe. The more I gave, the lighter I felt. The more I released, the freer I felt. The more I focused on helping others, the less concerned I became with protecting myself. It was not perfection. I was still learning. I still struggled. I still had moments of uncertainty. But the direction of my life had changed. The man who once measured success by accumulation was slowly learning to measure success differently. Not by what entered my hands, but by what flowed through them. And that lesson became even clearer when I began spending time among the very people I had previously overlooked. The poor were no longer statistics. They were no longer distant faces. They were no longer anonymous communities. They became friends, teachers, neighbors, and what they taught me about life would transform my understanding of wealth forever. After the decisions had been made and the projects had begun, I expected to feel that my responsibility was complete. In many ways, I believed I had already done the difficult part. Resources had been distributed. Programs had been launched. Communities were receiving support. From a distance, it would have been easy to consider the work finished. But God had another lesson waiting for me. A lesson that would change me even more deeply than giving away my possessions. I began spending significant amounts of time in rural communities throughout Burkina Faso. Not for ceremonies, not for publicity, not for photographs. I went because I wanted to understand. For most of my life, I had observed poverty from the outside. I had seen it through vehicle windows. I had seen it through reports and statistics. I had seen it through conversations with advisors. Now I wanted to see it face to face. I wanted to hear stories directly from the people living them. What I discovered humbled me. The first thing that struck me was how much suffering exists that never appears in headlines. Every family carried a story. Every village carried a story. Every person carried a story. Many of those stories involved struggles I had never personally experienced. I met mothers who stretched tiny amounts of food to feed entire families. I met fathers who worked tirelessly yet still worried about providing basic necessities. I met elderly men and women who had endured hardship for decades without losing their dignity. I met young people whose dreams far exceeded the opportunities available to them. One afternoon I sat with a family in a small village. Their home was simple. The furnishings were minimal. By many standards they possessed very little. Yet during our conversation, something remarkable happened. They shared food with me. Not because they had abundance, because they had generosity. That moment stayed with me. I realized that some of the most generous people I had ever encountered were people who owned very little. Meanwhile, some of the least generous people I had known possessed enormous wealth. The contrast challenged assumptions I had carried for years. I had once believed that wealth naturally produced generosity. Experience taught me otherwise. Generosity comes from the heart, not from the size of a bank account. As my visits continued, I spent more time listening than speaking. That alone represented a major change. Previously, I had often approached situations believing I already understood the answers. Now I realized how much I still needed to learn. I listened to mothers describe the challenge of raising children with limited resources. I listened to students explain how far they traveled each day to attend school. Some walked for hours. Some studied using materials shared among many classmates. Yet their determination remained extraordinary. I listened to farmers discuss unpredictable weather and difficult growing seasons. I listened to workers describe searching for opportunities that rarely appeared. The more I listened, the more one truth became clear. The poor did not need pity. They needed opportunity. They did not need to be viewed as helpless. They needed to be viewed as capable. They did not need people feeling sorry for them. They needed people willing to stand beside them. That realization transformed the way I thought about service. Helping people is important, but helping people build sustainable futures is even more important. A meal matters. Clean water matters. Medical care matters. Education matters. Skills matter. Opportunity matters. Dignity matters. The goal is not merely survival. The goal is empowerment. As these lessons unfolded, I found myself becoming increasingly uncomfortable with certain stereotypes I had once believed. Years earlier, I had sometimes assumed that poverty resulted primarily from laziness. Now I understood how simplistic that view had been. Many of the hardest working people I met were among the poorest. They woke before sunrise. They labored throughout the day. They carried responsibilities that would exhaust many others. Yet circumstances beyond their control often limited their opportunities. That realization taught me humility. It reminded me how dangerous it is to judge people without understanding their lives. We rarely know the battles someone else is fighting. We rarely know the obstacles someone else has faced. We rarely know how different our own lives might have been if we had been born into different circumstances. The more I learned, the more grateful I became, not merely for what I possessed, for the opportunities I had received, opportunities that many others never received. That gratitude gradually replaced the pride that had once dominated my thinking. Another lesson emerged as well. I noticed that many communities possessed tremendous strength despite difficult circumstances. Families supported one another. Neighbors shared resources. Faith remained strong. Hope remained alive. People continued helping each other even when they themselves had very little. Their resilience inspired me. In some ways, they were teaching me about wealth, not financial wealth, a different kind of wealth, the wealth of character, the wealth of gratitude, the wealth of faith, the wealth of community, the wealth of hope. These forms of wealth cannot be measured by financial statements, yet they often determine the quality of a person's life more than money ever can. One evening, after spending time with several families, I sat quietly reflecting on everything I had witnessed. A thought came to me. Years earlier, I would have looked at these communities and seen only what they lacked. Now I was beginning to see what they possessed: strength, perseverance, faith, courage, generosity, love. The change in perspective was profound. The people I once believed needed my help were helping me become a better person. The people I thought I was teaching were teaching me. The people I once overlooked had become some of my greatest instructors. That realization filled me with humility. It also filled me with gratitude, because I understood that God had not merely called me to give resources away. He had called me to change. He had called me to see people differently. He had called me to value people differently. He had called me to love people differently. The transformation was not about losing wealth. It was about gaining vision. Vision that allowed me to see the image of God in people I had previously ignored. Vision that allowed me to understand the true purpose of leadership. Vision that allowed me to recognize that every human being possesses dignity regardless of status, income, or position. Looking back now, I can honestly say that some of the most valuable lessons of my life did not come from boardrooms, political meetings, or financial success. They came from ordinary people living extraordinary lives under difficult circumstances. And those lessons prepared me for one final truth. A truth that every leader, every business person, every successful individual must eventually confront. The truth about what God truly values when He looks at a human life. As the years passed and I reflected on everything that had happened, one truth became clearer than ever before. Leadership is not what I once thought it was. When I was younger, I believed leadership was closely connected to authority. I believed it was connected to influence. I believed it was connected to power, resources, and the ability to make important decisions. Those things are certainly part of leadership, but they are not the heart of it. The heart of leadership is responsibility. More specifically, responsibility toward people, especially those who have the least ability to help themselves. The vision I received, the conversations with Father Emmanuel, the battle inside my soul, and the time I spent among struggling communities all pointed toward the same lesson. God measures success differently than the world does. The world often asks how much a person owns. God asks how much a person loves. The world asks how many people serve you. God asks how many people you serve. The world celebrates status. God looks at character. The world rewards accumulation. God values compassion. For a long time, I misunderstood these truths. Perhaps that is why the experience affected me so deeply, because it forced me to confront questions that many successful people spend their entire lives avoiding. Questions that cannot be answered with money. Questions that cannot be answered with achievements. Questions that cannot be answered with titles. Questions that must be answered by the condition of the heart. One of those questions became especially important to me. If everything I own disappeared tomorrow, who would I be? At first, the question frightened me, because many people unknowingly build their identity around possessions. They build their identity around careers. They build their identity around recognition. They build their identity around influence. When those things disappear, they no longer know who they are. I understand that danger because I once lived close to it. Today, however, I understand something different. A person's true value is not determined by what they possess. A person's true value is determined by who they become. This lesson applies not only to leaders, it applies to everyone. It applies to business owners. It applies to government officials. It applies to workers. It applies to retirees. It applies to parents and grandparents. It applies to every person listening to this story. One day, every one of us will leave behind everything we have accumulated, every account, every property, every vehicle, every investment, every title, every position, every earthly achievement. All of it remains behind. What remains is the life we lived, the choices we made, the people we helped, the kindness we showed, the mercy we extended, the love we demonstrated. These are the things that endure. When I think about the vision now, I no longer focus primarily on fear. Fear was certainly part of it. The images were terrifying. The warning was serious. But the deeper message was actually one of mercy. God was giving me an opportunity to change before it was too late. He was offering correction before judgment. He was offering transformation before regret. That realization fills me with gratitude, because many people receive warnings and ignore them. Many people hear truth and dismiss it. Many people postpone change until tomorrow. Then tomorrow becomes next year. Then next year becomes a lifetime. And eventually the opportunity disappears. I am thankful that God did not leave me where I was. I am thankful that He confronted my pride. I am thankful that He exposed my indifference. I am thankful that He showed me a better path, not because I deserved it, because of His mercy. There is another lesson I want every leader to hear. Position does not save the soul. Holding office does not save the soul. Being admired does not save the soul. Being respected does not save the soul. Having influence does not save the soul. Money does not save the soul. Power does not save the soul. Fame does not save the soul. Only a transformed heart can walk in the direction God desires. That transformation begins with humility. Humility allows us to recognize that everything we possess ultimately comes from God. Humility allows us to recognize that our time on earth is limited. Humility allows us to recognize that other people matter just as much as we do. Without humility, leadership becomes dangerous. Without humility, success becomes dangerous. Without humility, wealth becomes dangerous. Because pride blinds us, and blindness can persist for years before we recognize it. I know this because it happened to me. Sometimes people ask what changed my life most. Was it the vision? Was it the story of Lazarus? Was it selling my possessions? Was it meeting struggling families? The truth is that all of those experiences mattered. But beneath them all was one simple realization. The purpose of what we possess is not merely to benefit ourselves. The purpose of what we possess is to become a blessing to others. That principle can be applied at every level of life. A wealthy person can apply it. A middle-class family can apply it. A retiree can apply it. A student can apply it. The question is not how much we have. The question is what we do with what we have. That question continues to guide me. Even now, even today, even after everything that has happened, sometimes I imagine standing before God and hearing a question. Not a question about financial success. Not a question about political accomplishments. Not a question about public recognition. A different question. A far more important question. My son, what did you do for the people I placed in your care? When I first began asking myself that question years ago, I was uncomfortable with the answer. Today I feel something different. Not perfection, not pride, peace. Because I know that I tried to respond. I know that I listened when God corrected me. I know that I changed direction when He called me to change. I know that I used what I had been given to help people who needed opportunity, dignity, and hope. Most importantly, I know something else. The night Jesus Christ showed me that terrifying place, He was not simply warning me about the consequences of a hardened heart. He was rescuing me from becoming one of the people I saw there. That is why I tell this story. Not to impress anyone, not to gain admiration, not to present myself as an example of perfection. I tell it because someone listening today may be standing where I once stood. Successful, comfortable, respected, yet slowly becoming blind to the needs around them. If that person is listening, I pray they do not wait for a crisis before opening their heart. I pray they do not wait until regret becomes their teacher. I pray they choose compassion while they still have the opportunity. Because the greatest legacy any leader can leave behind is not wealth. It is not power. It is not influence. It is the number of lives that became stronger, safer, and more hopeful because God allowed that leader to serve them. After everything I have shared, there is one truth that remains firmly in my heart. Power cannot save a human soul. Money cannot save a human soul. Status cannot save a human soul. Only faith, compassion, humility, and a sincere relationship with God can guide us toward the life He desires for us. When I look at the world today, I see many reasons for concern. I see suffering. I see conflict. I see division. I see people pursuing wealth while neglecting mercy. I see hatred growing where love should exist. I see fear replacing hope in the hearts of many people. Yet despite all of this, I remain hopeful. I remain hopeful because I have learned that God can transform a heart in a single moment. He transformed mine. If He could change a man who once measured success by possessions, He can change anyone. My prayer today is simple. I pray for Burkina Faso. I pray for Africa. I pray for the people of the United States. I pray for every family listening from anywhere in the world. May we reject greed. May we turn away from hatred. May we choose kindness instead of selfishness. May we forgive when forgiveness is difficult. May we help one another when help is needed. May we remember that every person carries value in the eyes of God. No matter how dark the circumstances may seem, do not lose hope. No matter how difficult the season may become, do not surrender your faith. Light still exists. Mercy still exists. Goodness still exists. And God is still calling people toward compassion, truth, and love. I believe He is calling us now. Perhaps that is why you heard this story today. Perhaps someone needed this reminder. Perhaps someone needed encouragement to open their heart, reconcile with another person, help a struggling neighbor, or take the first step toward God. If that is you, do not wait. The opportunity to do good exists today. The opportunity to love exists today. The opportunity to change exists today. And that opportunity is a gift. Thank you for allowing me to share this testimony with you. May God bless Burkina Faso. May God bless Africa. May God bless the people of America. May God bless every nation represented by those listening today. And if you also believe that kindness is stronger than hatred, that mercy is stronger than pride, and that hope is stronger than despair, I invite you to leave a prayer in your heart and continue sharing encouragement wherever you go. Together we can help bring hope to people who desperately need it. And may the peace of God remain with all of us, today and always.